You're listening to Dare to Transform, where we find the vision, dedication, and motivation behind inspiring stories of transformation. This is episode number 4, Dare to Power Up. I'm your host, Angela Harris, founder of Work Apart, here with my co-host, Meriem Dibaj, bringing you an iTransform production.
Our guest today is Jeff Schnurr, CEO and co-founder of Jaza.
Jeff believes that entrepreneurship and innovation can solve our planet's biggest challenges. He is the co-founder and CEO of Jaza, a solar energy startup working to provide electricity to the 1.2 billion people currently living without it. In addition to his work at Jaza, Jeff is the founder and chair of Community Forests International, an organization that has empowered rural communities in Tanzania to plant over 3 million trees. Jeff was named Ernst and Young Entrepreneur of the Year 2015 Special Citation for Social Entrepreneurship, one of Canada's top 10 volunteers by the CBC and Manulife, and one of Explorer magazine's top 30 under 30. So welcome, Jeff. We're so excited to have you here today.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
So we would love to know, if you could share a bit more about yourself, tell us who you are, what you're doing today, how you got started, so that the audience has a better idea of what you're about.
Yeah, great. So I guess I could start. I'm from New Brunswick, grew up here in Sackville. And after high school, I kind of decided I wanted to see the world before I became a part of it. Didn't really know what I wanted to study, what my sort of orientation was. And I ended up traveling Europe, Southeast Asia, India, came back to Canada, thought I would go to university, and ended up buying a motorcycle and driving to Mexico and then traveling Central South America. Ended up coming back to Canada and planting trees and going to Cambridge, England, and then Tanzania.
Okay.
And from there, I started a tree planting project and then an organization behind that, and then Jaza Energy, which is my current endeavor. So in a nutshell, like born and raised from New Brunswick, and then kind of expanded out globally from here.
Amazing. I wondered what the connection there was to like Sackville and how you how you went to Tanzania.
Yeah, it's like if you're going to get out of Sackville, and it was such a small place where I grew up with a lot of confidence, it was like the same for me to end up in Tanzania as it was like, Halifax or Toronto. So it was like,
yeah. Well, it's funny too. I think when you get a chance to kind of travel the world, it becomes, yes, you're in a different city or a different country or whatever, but you start to see, similarities, right? Like you start to see like little communities and little, glimpses of things that are similar to home. And we chatted offline. Sackville's very near and dear to my heart. I went to university there too, and I kind of joke that I grew up there. I'm putting that in quotation marks, which the audience can't see. But, I kind of learned in this little town of like 3,000 people. And I forget how many of those are actually, students versus
most of them.
Right. But it gives you a chance to kind of, think outside the box and look at the world in a different way. So that's awesome. All right. So one of my questions is, did you always know that you wanted to be an entrepreneur? Like, it sounds like you were a free spirit and you wanted to see the world, but the entrepreneur part of it, that's what I'm curious about.
Well, no, actually, and here's the interesting thing about, the sort of formal education system is there's no real entrepreneur box at the career fair. There's no you're going and looking and seeing, looking at my career, and it's and then you're like, you know what? I just want to start something from scratch. Yeah. I think that's kind of and this is the sort of ongoing question, are you born an entrepreneur or made an entrepreneur, right? Is it, either pathological or some type of undiagnosed mental health issue, or it's just
right?
the way it goes. Yeah. But for me, I actually originally was interested in anthropology when I was in high school, and that's kind of probably why I wanted to travel, but then got interested in literature. And when I actually first went to Tanzania, I went there to write a novel. Mm-hmm. So I was actually writing a novel. And a lot of the people I met, first kind of 6 months I was there was really just in a house, and I was staying in a town of like 20,000 people on an island off the Tanzanian coast. One of the islands is Zanzibar. So like really end of the earth stuff. And I would write, and then I would go and drink some coffee in the street and really just try and meet people. And people didn't really care about the novel, but I'd finance a lot of my travel through tree planting.
Right.
And literally just made some good friends that were like, hey, you know, we'd love to do some tree planting here. Do you think you can help? And I think that the sort of entrepreneur is actually just someone that when you see a problem, you're foolish enough to think you can solve it. And the business model, and like some people have different motivations, right? Some people are just like, I want to make a ton of money, and it's trying to, you know, fill this sense of self-worth. Other people are just like, they have an itch they need to scratch, or they're just, they see a problem and think they can do something about it. And I guess I was in that camp.
Yeah, I love that. And little known fact, even Meriem doesn't know this, but I planted trees for a little while too. Imagine.
Wouldn't wish it upon my worst enemy. So I'm sorry to hear that.
I know. I just actually had a bit of a moment of a flashback.
The black flies.
Exactly. That's also a life-altering experience when you're crazy enough to do that. But yeah, so and I would agree with you. I think that, you know, sometimes people, you know, they see opportunities or they see ways to help, and they're like, okay, I'm going to step in. And I don't know that we always need to have a label for what that is. Like, you know, whether it's entrepreneur or it's like, just like you said, it's being a problem solver, right?
Exactly. Yeah. And I think that like you say, it manifests in a bunch of different ways, but one of them is like, okay, I'm actually going to start a company or an organization to try and put some people and some hopefully capital behind the problem.
Yeah, exactly. So you go to Tanzania to write a book, you start planting trees, or you start like problem solving there. Like, help me. So what's the story, you know, and it can't be hours. We don't have hours, but like, help me go from like being that guy and like drinking coffee and meeting people to like where we're at right now with like Jaza Energy and Tanzania specifically.
So like, I think that I was that guy. I was the guy that was, you know, the stranger in a strange land. And I think that kind of really, like, in hindsight, you know, at the time I probably thought I could do something about it, but I think it was really just connecting with the right people, some amazing Tanzanians on the ground. Like, I didn't really know anything about planting trees in Tanzania, if I was completely honest. Like, they're like, can we do this? And I was like, yeah, sure. And there's probably the idea that like I had a bunch of money somewhere that I could help do it. So I was really just kind of cheerleader on the ground and went to communities, and like they would be like, oh, Canadian tree expert, what type of tree should we plant? And I would literally be like, how about this tree? And it would be like a cassava, which would be the equivalent of saying like, let's plant potatoes, right? So like they were quickly like, okay, this guy's an idiot. Like he obviously doesn't know how to plant trees.
Right.
But I kept like going out with them, and we kept really, I formed great relationships with, you know, the co-founders eventually of that effort. And we just collected some seed, and we grew 100,000 trees that year. So it really just hit this point where like people, place, timing, and it worked. And I came back to Canada and was, you know, still thinking, okay, I'll, you know, write the second draft or the third draft of this novel. But I ended up seeing people transform a landscape. Like, you know, it was only like 12 communities, but 100,000 trees. Like you could see how people could actually make a change on a landscape. And it almost became a way that I could fulfill almost creating that narrative, but in real time through people in collaboration with people that shared a vision.
Yeah.
And I literally Googled, how do you start an organization? And then it was like, okay, you can do these things called non-for-profit. I went to some of the other people I planted trees with, a guy named Damon Hardy, who's also from the Sackville area, and a guy named Zach Melanson from Moncton. And we said, okay, let's create an organization to support this project. And we actually got Canadian tree planters to donate money that they'd earned from planting trees to support the initiative.
Wow.
And that's how it really got off the ground. So like all of us worked for years, Tanzania included, without any salary. any compensation. Actually won like a Volunteer of the Year award through CBC, and it wasn't because I was trying to volunteer. It was just like the way that the economics worked out.
Yeah.
So I can't take the altruism credit there, but we basically built this organization that has since planted over 3 million trees with hundreds of communities.
Wow.
And it really was coming from tree planting in Canada, where you'd work 10, 12 hours a day doing some of the hardest work on the face of the planet, to switch and say, like, I can work towards something that is incredibly positive, that can drive such widespread change. It's really hard to go back on that and say, okay, well, maybe I'll go back and, get my undergrad degree, or, work doing sales and marketing. No offense to anyone that does that, but it's just, once you're in it, it's really like, it just becomes a part of you.
So once you have that big vision too, right?
Yeah. And I think your vision can start, I think a lot of entrepreneurs, it's not like you're this, Steve Jobs type where you're, okay, I'm going to make a dent in the universe and everyone's going to, do this thing. Sometimes you just find something that works, and then you can imagine what the world looks like, and you start sort of curating your view for the world based on how you see people move.
Yeah.
So would you say that this was your lifestyle transformation, or is it more just you found what you were looking for?
Yeah, I mean, the first time I went, after we grew some trees and, went back and saw people, planting trees on the landscape, and I was totally like, still in culture shock, thought I knew what I was seeing, but didn't, and was probably just sort of spinning around with a smile on my face, being like, wow, this is great. But it was like really that moment where you were like, for me, I realized that, it's kind of that idea that people are more powerful than they think they are, right? The fact that you can go from nothing, from zero, from an idea to something that transforms so many people's lives. I'd say that was the moment of transformation for me, where I could work. I don't work because I have to work. I'm not like a gazillionaire, but like I do the work because I like doing it. Like and I think about, what would I do if I had $1 billion, and what would I do if I had $0? They should be the same. And this is really, for me, where that intersection, matches. And then with people, and being able to bring in people and see people develop through an enterprise, and see the growth of a team, and see people, achieve more than they ever thought they could achieve themselves.
Yes.
Yeah.
It's like, you're not going to go back on that.
It's very satisfying to see that, because you feel, it's that moment when you feel that your life has a purpose, and it's not only about you, but about all the other people around you, and the transformation and the satisfaction you bring to their lives. I think being able to achieve that level of satisfaction is cannot compare to any other achievement.
Yeah, I mean, if you're developing, if service to others is the most selfish thing you can do, and I'm just gonna say it because it's like, it seems contradictory, but like, whether you're a leader of a team or an entrepreneur and you're creating jobs and providing something for families, like at some point it's not about the money. It's like that service to others is how you actually accumulate the best things in your life. Like everything I have in my life that I'm proud of is because I've worked for others. Mm-hmm. And it's whether it's the resources I've been able to accumulate to try and push myself even further, or the economic incentives, or the money you make, or the people you work with, or the rooms that you're now a part of because you've grown so much. As an entrepreneur, that all comes down to the fact that you've been able to solve a problem for a customer, right? And it's
exactly. And in your case, it's not just a problem for a customer in the economic definition, but it's for humans to come, and our whole, the whole world. It's like planting trees can be seen as a simple act, but when you look at the large picture, and with all what's happening now, it's something very important for our generation, but generations to come. So it's a wonderful thing to be able to be part of.
Yeah, and I think that that's the kind of segue for me into the new energy venture is like, when you look at the systems of business, those have been invested in as frameworks more than any other system. Capitalism has moved resources globally in ways that no other mechanism has. So for me, was really interested in not just doing a non-for-profit or an activity where like you do something great and then you're going around trying to fundraise, or like the activity then leads to some type of external fundraising effort. I was really interested in trying to find a business model or something that could, grow something very quickly into what I think are some of the largest untapped markets on the face of the planet, which is sub-Saharan Africa, right? Like there's, this is the demographic. This is where, the average age is 18 in sub-Saharan Africa. Like
it's the future.
It's the future. There's no metric you can look at that would tell you otherwise. And I think that even in terms of opportunity sets, it's usually where there's great pace of change, or like when something goes from being, communist to capitalist, or where it goes from not having a mobile network to having a mobile network, or those rates of change is where you see really big opportunities. And that's,
Right.
That's what's happening globally now, right?
Yeah.
Exactly.
I think one of the coolest things, when I was, I was preparing before talking to you, Jeff, was, and I saw this in a few places. I think it's on your LinkedIn that I saw this. It says there are 1 billion people currently living without electricity around the world. I work with some very smart people to try and change that. And, to your point, I think, it's problem solving. It's like, it's looking at opportunities, but I also think like if you're writing something like this, like you clearly have a vision for what's possible, right?
Yeah, and I think the energy business actually came out of the tree planting work, where we'd worked with some communities and people were like, Jeff, trees are great, but where can I charge my cell phone? And
Right.
we'd worked in some of the great work, this organization, Community Forest International, which is still ongoing. It's being run by an amazing team. They're still planting a ton of trees, but they were able to like increase household incomes. They were able to, move a ton of different metrics in terms of community economic development. They worked focusing on improving livelihoods for women or income for women. And like they were transforming communities, but people were still coming and saying like, hey, like they were traveling, in this case, by boat, an hour to go pay someone to charge their phone, half the cost of owning a phone, went to paying someone to charge their phones. Like it was just mind boggling. And then people, like 600 million people in sub-Saharan Africa still use kerosene to light their homes. So we started looking at this problem and realized like there's a business model where we can just switch what people are currently spending. Sub-Saharan Africans spend around 14 billion annually on kerosene. So we could just, if we took that $14 billion spend into a solar product, like we'd be building a truly scalable model that can just scale into the problem, displace kerosene, and ultimately like the next segment of the globe needs to come online. They need access to electricity. They need access to data and, connectivity to the internet. But if they electrify the way that the rest of the world has, we're all cooked as a planet anyways. Like the planet can't handle that carbon budget.
Mm-hmm.
So Jaza is really in that intersection and finding the business model that can scale to provide a solar energy solution for the 1 billion people that are currently living without it.
So Jeff, help me understand, and the audience as well, like, can you tell us, like, give us a little bit more detail about these like renewable energy hubs? Like, I know you mentioned
what we do. Yeah.
I'm like, well, I'm trying to go from like, okay, kerosene. I'm like, sitting in my office with like all the things right now. And I'm like, not my thing. So I'm like, help me understand how you go from that to sort of this.
Yeah. So what
cell phone.
So what we do at Jaza is we build these shops called hubs, and they've got panels on the roof. We prefabricate them, so we manufacture the whole building and ship it to a community where there's very limited electricity. We can set it up in 3 hours.
Wow.
We hire 2 women from every community to run the location. So we're typically hiring women that have never had a job before, have seen no economic opportunity.
Wow.
We're giving them a smartphone, putting them in a place where they're running a high-tech solution in their community. And then they start charging batteries, lithium-ion packs that are similar to the battery in your cell phone. So they're really, really high quality, high density batteries that they carry home and then use to power their entire households. So our customers actually come the same way you'd maybe take a propane tank for your barbecue. That's actually how our customers are powering their entire homes. So for us, without building any grid infrastructure, transmission lines, we
That's
can just
amazing.
meet customers because they really want to just power TVs, stereos, phones, and lights.
Right.
So we've developed a solution that typically people would go to a shop and buy kerosene and take that home and burn it. They just come to Jaza and take a battery home and use it to power their house.
So how big is this? I'm trying to imagine, how big is this?
The shop's pretty small. It's kind of 2 meters by 2 meters, just like a wall behind we call them Jaza stars that run the locations. Wow. So there's a bunch of batteries behind them, and then they just serve them out. Huh. And the kind of thesis, the kind of really exciting thing for us now is, when you look at sub-Saharan Africa, if you look at nighttime image from space, and you should go and check this out, but if you look at the world, America's incredibly light from space. You can see Europe's incredibly light from space. And in sub-Saharan Africa, there's just kind of nothing. Yeah. And in terms of our team, we've got some great Tanzanian colleagues on our leadership team. And our mission is to say, why isn't it lit? Why can't you see our communities from space at night? Yeah. And it's because of people, right? People built New York City, people in capital. So our sort of thesis is let's bring in the people in the capital and let's make the world see our communities from space and let's light it up. So that's really the mission now of the company. Every household, every time we sell our product, we've got another customer that's lighting up their homes and contributing to that vision, because there's no reason in 2020 why there's 600 million people living without electricity. Yeah. We have the technology to solve it. Yeah. There's enough smart, hardworking people out there. We can figure out how we can actually just eradicate kerosene as a lighting source.
Yeah. I'm just curious about something. You have been very specific on your you call them Jaza stars.
Yeah.
And it was very clear you're hiring women. Can you tell us more? Why is it only women, or what's the thinking behind it? And
well, it's
a good
kind
thing. It's not. We're not used to people being very specific on who they are hiring. So I know that I'm an African, so I know that there is always a reason behind those things. I'm just curious about why Jaza is choosing women to run those shops.
So, there's a couple of layers, and this is a good question. I'm excited that you asked this. So, the simplest solution is we just started doing it and we kind of liked it and we kept doing it, right? We went into a community and we're like, who are we going to hire? And then looking at the candidates, we were just okay, let's just hire women, and did more of it. But in reality, it's kind of ties into that same conversation around helping people is probably the most selfish thing you can do. It seems like we're doing something good for people or helping women, but ultimately they're running our business. And if globally, when you think about hiring people, you either need to pay up and pay a lot for the best people, or you need to be really good at picking people that are underpriced, picking people before they've done anything, which is really hard. Everyone thinks they're good at picking the best candidate, but it is really hard to, pick people that don't know what they're worth, but are great and they're going to grow and accelerate and become these amazing people. And I know that, it's something that everyone struggles with, but if you look at just the data that says, women get paid less than men, whether it's 70% or 50% of what like just the data alone, women probably have, you know, still have a brain and have had some type of similar education. And there's like no real reason that I can see why there shouldn't be, you know, they should be comparable. If there's that discount globally, then it's like, and you know, people optimize and just hire a bunch of men for jobs anyways. So we just kind of like the idea, the paradigm of actually flipping it and putting up, you know, we go into communities and put up signs that say like, we're only hiring women. And that's just such an interesting,
I love
interesting.
That. I want to picture that, please.
Yeah, for sure. But I think that, you know, for us, like we feel really lucky to work with such amazing people, and finding, you know, that sort of mispriced talent. Like we'll hire women that have never had a job before, and they're like, yeah, I wanted to be a doctor because I wanted to give back to our community. And they, you know, making a Jaza star means finding someone that can actually say like, you know, some of our Jaza stars will have my number and be like, Jeff, we need more inventory here. Like, we need to do this. Like, you know, it's their space, it's their domain, and they have a ton of ownership because they've seen their status increase while working with us. And that just changes the entire trajectory of the business, right? So we're trying to get to the point where we're building a super strong culture by finding, you know, potentially it's an entire population or a segment of our population that hasn't been given opportunity, giving them opportunity, and they're the ones that are transforming their communities. And for us, it's a no-brainer from a business perspective because it's, you know, they are the ones running our business, high integrity, they know what they're doing. And once, you know, their status is tied to the outcomes that we're looking for. So it's kind of a perfect combination.
I love that.
And knowing about a little about that culture, I think it's all you are in the same time transforming the culture from its heart.
Absolutely.
By choosing and focusing on the woman, because in those cultures and in those communities, women are seen as the pillars of their families, so for their communities. So it's a great example you are setting. I hope that other companies and other organizations will follow the path you are starting by investing in women, in young population, but also in those far communities that unfortunately have stolen a lot of their wealth into the advantage of the other continents, and are today being like pushed aside just because they have nothing to offer, but they have really never been given an opportunity to showcase what they can do. But I hope that other companies and organizations will really look at what Jaza is doing and start duplicating the mindset and bring other opportunities to that community and others around the world who are still missing on them.
Absolutely. And I like the idea of, you know, if you're a young girl growing up in one of our communities and you're just like, it just makes sense that, hey, mom runs high tech in this village. Like, it's just such an interesting
How cool is that?
paradigm, right? Where it's not like, it's like, yeah, you know, dad fishes, mom runs the technology in this town. It's just such an interesting, you know,
Very
paradigm
cool.
shift.
So one of the things I was very curious about, you list Swahili as one of your languages on LinkedIn. So I'm curious about that. Like that doesn't sound like it would be an easy feat to learn that. Tell me about that.
Yeah, I mean, when I first was involved with Community Forest International, the tree organization, our co-founder there is a guy named Mbarak Musa Omar, who's, you know, he lives on the island that we started planting trees on, Pemba. And I was like 21 at the time. So I ended up just living with him kind of on and off for years. Like, so I go back to Tanzania and, you know, he has 8 kids now. So it was like a pretty dynamic household.
Yeah.
And I feel like just really submersed in the culture where, and I'm not a language person. So like, don't think that I'm, you know, this person that can just pick things up, like terrible at instruments, terrible at language. It just like literally was brute force getting pounded into my head. And then, you know, was able to just over time hear it and interact. And I think for, you know, like Meriem, you mentioned lots of people from away are coming into this market. I think for me, being able to speak to a customer directly is like very, very, very important, because it's like entrepreneurs struggle with this all the time, where like you often want to, you maybe have a solution and then you go looking for a problem.
Yeah.
So this is like, this is really a critical piece of the puzzle to make sure that, you know, I can at least talk to a customer and say like, well, did it work or not? Because even if I just look at the data and the metrics and, you know, the utilization, or people aren't using it the way I want them to, I can still convince myself it's good enough. But if you talk to a customer and they're like, hey man, like this Jaza pack cut off like right when I was eating dinner, like this was really poor, this really sucked. Then you know, that's the sort of signal in the noise.
Yeah, absolutely. I love that.
So knowing a little about the story of Jeff, I know that by the time when you went to Tanzania, and I don't know the exact timing and details, but I know that you had another business in New Brunswick.
Yes, I did. I did do a few different things in New Brunswick. So the Tanzanian,
while you were starting the adventure in Tanzania, I would say, because you had organization, then the business. So can you just tell us how the Jeff, the CEO, the entrepreneur, the businessman, let's say, was running two different businesses in two different cultures, and what happened since then?
Well, it's funny because it actually kind of happened the other way around, where started doing work in Tanzania, really liked the idea that people could make a change on the landscape. If you found a way with the tree business, where we used to say like, make conservation a day job. People made their living planting trees, therefore they were planting trees. And we came back to Atlantic Canada and we were like, well, we should do this in our own backyard. So, and there was a period of time we actually brought some of our Tanzanian colleagues to like, to New Brunswick and started visiting communities, asking people like, oh, what can we do here to help people deal with climate change, which totally shifted that model, where it's usually like, you know, a bunch of clueless, you know, white people showing up in Africa and saying, what should we do here? We flipped it where there was, you know, some Swahili dudes rolling around communities and saying like, what, you're having issues? Look at all your land, like just plant trees. This is crazy. So it was like, it was kind of fun to switch it on its head. But what we started doing is looking at ways that we could help people make conservation a day job here in Atlantic Canada, and started developing projects here around just looking for ways that we could find the economic incentive. We ended up using carbon credits as a way that people could actually conserve land, and sort of ran those two factions of the work in Tanzania and Canada for about a decade. And then, you know, moved now. I'm still involved a little bit as, you know, on the board of that organization, but I'm now full-time CEO at Jaza. So it was kind of like a combination of a few different, you know, things, and eventually, you know, the team running Community Forest International is just doing a phenomenal job, and is, you know, doing a better job now than I ever did when they were, you know, they're running it and growing that organization. And I think I'm a sucker for punishment. So just when it looked like it was really working out, went back to something that was at zero and tried to grow something new from scratch.
Nice.
Cool.
So did you finish writing that novel that brought you to Tanzania?
I think it was, I did the first draft, but it's probably draft 0. And I think it was so bad that I don't even think I was able to read it from start to finish since then. So this is kind of
but that was the good. I think you will always cherish that novel, because this is what brought you there. This is how the story started, or something else.
Exactly. No, and it's just like that's the beauty of life. I think that, and this ties back to your theme of transformation. Like one thing I've learned time and time again is sometimes the reason you got here isn't also the reason that will get you to the next level. We constantly need to be reinventing ourselves, and even as entrepreneurs, the organization changes, the shifts, you know, the mindset changes. And sometimes the reason I got here, if I keep doing it, will be the reason I don't get to the next layer too, right?
Right.
So I think you always have to be willing to sort of like, you know, almost like prune back and reevaluate, and almost have the courage to throw out everything that you've ever done and just sit in the moment and then think about where you want to go next, because sometimes the habits, the heuristics, the patterns that got you to this position are actually holding you back from the next level. And I think that was an early lesson in being able to really just do something, you know, breathe with something, work through it, and then realize, okay, now what's the next step?
Exactly. Well, and I think that's, I think that's the biggest thing, to your point. I think, and many of us know it too. It's like, it's learning the lessons, and it's like taking it all in, and, and then accepting it, and then realizing what you need to change or what you're willing to change to, as you said, go to the next level or do the next thing, that take the next adventure, if you will. So, all right. So one of the last questions that I have for you, and we ask this one a lot. So what piece of advice would you give to someone who wants to grow in their career or their business? And it can be literally anything. Like, what comes to your mind?
Yeah, I mean, I think that it really starts with some sense of curiosity. Like, so many people try and conform to something that they feel like is perceived, or like, most of society is wrong. Most of how we've organized ourselves is, it works for now, but whatever system is in place isn't permanent. And we always we put so many rules and so many guidelines on ourselves and things that we can't do, and limit ourselves so much.
Yeah.
But if you actually just focus on what you're curious about, that seems to be the most sustainable motivator that I've been able to find.
I hear
because
you.
What that does is, like, even if you get incredibly rich doing what you're doing, you're going to actually use those resources to fuel your curiosity. Or if you have nothing, you're still going to be able to use that as the signal for what you should do. Like, it's sustainable. It compounds over time. You end up, building your ability to learn and discover more. So I think that anyone in their stage of their career, like, you should be asking yourself really honestly, what do I want to know about? What do I want to discover? And then, like, put yourself behind that question. And it doesn't, like, and as long as you're really honest with yourself, like, it doesn't have to be something that someone imposes on you.
Mm-hmm.
But if you're honest with yourself and what you actually want, like, you will achieve it.
Mm-hmm.
But most people don't know what they want. They don't know what they're interested in, and that's fine. But, like, it doesn't have to be grand. It doesn't have to be like, I want to power 1 billion people. It doesn't have to be that. Like, even for me, when I started, it was just like, can I solve the smallest problem in front of me? When we started Jaza, we just put panels on the roof of a school and then a mosque, and we charge motorcycle batteries, which are not meant for this application. It's this, craziest idea ever. We actually originally thought maybe we could charge cell phones, and then people could plug their cell phone into their house and use it to power their house. Like, we were just curious, like, what's the easiest way we can do this for the people asking us the question?
Yeah.
And then over time, you just keep following that curiosity, and that will grow, and that will be sustainable. And that's, during good times and hard times, it's something it's outside of external influences.
Yeah. Well, and I do think that, like, to your point, I think curiosity is definitely what drives me. And I think it drives most of us. And you brought up and you said, people don't know what they want, or they don't know this. They actually do, I would argue.
Do.
But it's all of that, like, external pressure, the external noise that, you start to doubt the curiosity, and you're like, well, I shouldn't just Google this thing or go do that thing or whatever, even though you're, like, intensely curious about it, because you don't know the next step of it, right? But,
and then once you know what it is, like, you have to be willing to put your reputation on the line.
Right.
And it's like, and we're often our worst enemies with this. No one really thinks about us that much, as much as we'd like to think that they do. Right? But like, ultimately, like, if you have something that, you want to see in the world, you have to then put your reputation on the line and stand by it, and know that, like, memory is forgiving. There's really, there's a difference between things that are dangerous and things that are scary. Like, starting a business is not, like, dangerous. You're not going to lose an arm or a leg. Yeah. Like, it's really just realizing, like, here's the thing that I'm curious about, and I'm willing to stand behind this.
Yeah. I love that.
So I have one last question. So you said that you started traveling because you wanted to know, you wanted to discover you before you make a decision or make a choice on what will dictate what your future is. And unfortunately, we live in a world that we are always boxed. We go to the university to get a degree and we need to work with that degree and in that field and basta. Which is not always the greatest way to do things, but you said no to that. So it's like a mindset transformation that we don't see a lot. So can you just tell the young people who are scared, who are scared to make a decision, who are scared to make a choice? And I remember myself being in a meeting with the CEO of a company back in 2010, and who had a great career and all that. And I remember a friend of mine asking the CEO, so everyone is telling me that I have to choose or to pick my field now, and this is what will dictate and shape my whole life. And he laughed. He said, I have worked in 33, I remember this very well. I have worked in 33 industries and doing all kinds of jobs before finding the one I liked. And everyone was surprised. He was like, no, don't let others influence you or tell you what you need to know. Go and try things. Don't be afraid of trying things, of like failing and starting all over and going to places that everyone is telling you don't go there. What are you doing there?
Yeah.
So I'm very curious about what you have to say to these young people.
Yeah, I love that question because it's almost this, there's this pressure of the choice as though you only have that choice once.
Yeah.
And there couldn't be a more false like idea, right? Like how
Yeah.
many people do we know that are like mid-career and they're like, I'm going to go back to school and get a master's in X, Y, or Z, right? It's just like, you always have the choice. You
Yeah.
always have that choice. Like there's no point in your life where like things compound to the point where you are trapped in the decision you made when you were, 18 with your brain developing and trying to understand your place in the world. Like, it's a completely false dichotomy. It comes out of an older time where we needed to fit the skills for, it's largely a wartime like function where it's like we need to fit the skills to the function that we need to build the machine that will help our society survive, right?
Yeah.
And there couldn't, like, that's the world of scarcity. And as you move into abundance, like you could make the decision to change that orientation with your career based on your opportunities, which you should be maximizing for every day. But if you're at the point where you're young and you're trying to figure this out, like really it ties back to that curiosity and what type of optionality you want, because usually what will happen is you gravitate to the things that you kind of like and you're kind of good at, and you develop a few core competencies, but then you start putting them together. So for me, I was planting trees in Canada, traveling and writing, and then I put together the ability to communicate with forestry globally. Like I just used the tools to make something. Exactly. But where it gets really interesting, and I'm sure you guys see this, are the people that, when you meet someone who's like really good at computer science, but also is doing like improv theater, and you're just like, what? Like those things don't usually go together, but those are the people that have really followed what they're interested in and then can practice that in terms of their life. And that's when, you get people are satisfied, you live a more rich life and you're able to seize opportunities that other people can't. Yeah. So that the advice is like, don't fall into the trap thinking that you've got to make this choice now for September because school's starting. It's honestly like you will have that, there will be another September and you will be able to make that decision again and again and again. And you should be. Yeah. As you accumulate more skills and you're able to find more things that you can apply yourself to.
I love that.
Yeah, that's amazing.
Well, yes, exactly. We could probably keep going and asking you and probably have like 50 more questions. And that, Meriem and I are both like intensely curious people. So we'll probably still keep in touch with you and ask you more. But we do want to thank you for sharing here today. It was a great chat. And that is it for today. Thanks for coming, Jeff.
Thanks for having me, guys.
Thanks a lot for making time for us, and we'll be in touch. And thanks again. Good luck to Jaza and to you. And we're all curious to see what will happen from 5 years from now.
Or even in just in September.
Exactly. Back in school. All right, guys. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Jeff, for joining us today and sharing your story. I'm Angela Harris.
And I'm Meriem Dibaj.
And this has been episode number 4 of Dare to Transform, an I Transform podcast in collaboration with Work of Heart.
Have an amazing day.
We hope you dare to transform.